Hey guys, this is going to be your speedy review on personality to include psychoanalytic, humanistic trait, and social cognitive theories. Hopefully this doesn't require too much review because I feel like everyone remembers Freud pretty well, but psychoanalytic theory, also known as the psychodynamic theory, is going to be Freud's theory. Now we have newer psychoanalytic practitioners today, and we do not treat them the same as Freud because they don't obviously believe the same things that Freud believed because most of that has been discredited. We do look at Jung, we do look at Adler. Remember that Erik Erikson is a neo-Freudian. And then we'll get into trait theory, some of the humanistic theory, and then social cognitive theory. So, psychoanalytic theory deals with the unconscious. So, anytime the word unconscious comes up, there's a great chance that it is talking about psychoanalytic. When we look at accessing the unconscious, the royal road to the unconscious was our dream state, and that was established by Freud. He said that there was manifest, which was the explicit content of the dream, versus the latent, which is the hidden meaning of the dream. He also used something called free association. He would allow a person to just freely associate. They would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And whatever kind of came out at the beginning was probably shielded, but as they continued to talk, they would let their guard down and they would be able to bring out more information. Hypnosis was used, put people in a dissociative state. You'd be able to access things that they couldn't filter through their kind of conscious awareness. And the use of projective tests. Remember, projection is a defense mechanism where we take our emotional states and we project it onto something else. So a thematic apperception test, you look at a picture and you tell a story, and it's you projecting onto the story how you feel or think. The ink blot test, you look at some colorful or black and white ink blots, and again, you project your feelings onto them. Make sure that you know that they're projective tests. That's usually the biggest thing that is being tested on that concept. Freud's three components of personality are the id, the superego, and the ego. The ego is the part that you're aware of. So if we were to pop up the idea of the iceberg, it is what is above the waterline. You have a little bit of the superego above the waterline because that is formed by social interaction. It's the laws and the rules and the regulations that you are provided as you start to become a social person. And then you have the id. And Freud would say that an infant is entirely id driven. They demand what they want, they cry when they want things. It's all about what makes them happy. So the id is going to be purely pleasure based, whatever makes you happy. It's going to contain sexual motivations, and it's also going to contain aggression. The superego is also going to control all the rules and norms that you have internalized over the years. Those two components are usually mostly under the waterline, so they're supposed to be unconscious. The id is completely unconscious. We don't have any awareness of it, according to Freud. So, Freud said that every once in a while, like an iceberg would in the water, it bobs up and down. Every once in a while, a little bit of the id will come into our conscious awareness. He said that that happens during dream states. The psychosexual development model, 5 stages. First stage being the oral stage. Oral stage, the erogenous zone is the mouth, and you can have a fixation at this stage. In other words, if breastfeeding didn't go as planned according to Freud, you could become orally retentive. In other words, you are going to want to constantly put things into your mouth. You are going to be gullible. You'll eat anything. Expulsive, you spew things out. So you fight, you argue. Again, the idea was that with each of these stages, there was a sexual erogenous zone. The second stage is going to be the anal stage, and that's roughly 1 to 3 years of age. That's when children start to develop that sense of autonomy and to do for themselves. Part of that is potty training, so that's where Freud focused. You could have a child that becomes anal retentive. That would be part of that stage. In other words, they try to gain control by keeping in their poo. Then you move on to the phallic stage. The phallic stage is roughly from 3 to about 6, and this is where children start to become aware of their, well, according to Freud, boys would become aware that they had a phallus, and they would start to feel sexual love towards their mothers. They would see competition with their fathers. The Oedipus complex would then emerge. They would resolve that complex by identifying with their dad and becoming his buddy. You had Karen Horney, who felt that girls were somehow misrepresented in all of this because we did not have something like the Oedipus stage. or have an Oedipus complex. So she then decided that we had an Electra complex, and that we also too desired our fathers, but because we couldn't be castrated, we weren't forced to resolve those issues until much later. So that's why she assumed girls had problems with their mothers. That is an oversimplified kind of explanation, and there are plenty of people who have no problem with their parents. So that was the phallic stage, marked mostly by the concept of the Oedipus complex. Then there's the latent stage, and latency, remember, everything is kind of under the surface. So for the latency stage, everything kind of goes dormant. So it's dormant, and girls think boys are icky, boys think girls are icky. They kind of say segregated to a certain degree, and then right around about 11 or 12, we have the genital stage, and sexual desires re-emerge according to Freud. And remember, I told you in class my problem with that is the word re-emerge. They don't re-emerge, they actually emerge. They actually become aware of. You should know your defense mechanisms. So I told you guys identification is sometimes treated as a defense mechanism, sometimes not. Repression, projection, reaction formation, and sublimation. Those two tend to get confused. Remember, you act and form the opposite, where sublimation, you sit there and you just do whatever it is in a socially acceptable behavior, or you find yourself doing something socially acceptable instead of the behavior. So it could be the celibate priest who writes sexual poetry. That's not reaction and formation, that's sublimation. Or it could be the husband who wants to cheat on his wife but finds that he always has work to do on the weekends. That's also sublimation. They do something socially acceptable instead of engage in the impulse. Reaction formation, you do the exact opposite. I'm terrified to speak, so I act like I'm the coolest, most amazing person on the planet. Regression, you become younger. Displacement, you take it and you put it on something that is lesser. So I can't yell at my husband, so I yell at my dog. Projection, I'm in a bad mood, so I treat my husband as if he's in a bad mood. And I feel like you guys should know repression pretty well. Two other theories you should know. There's Jung. So Jung has the idea of the archetypes of these models or these specific kind of symbols in our dreams. A tree means the same thing for all of us. A star might mean something for all of us, but basically there are all of these things, and his idea comes from the collective unconscious. Again, remember, this is back from the early 1900s, late 1800s. The belief that we all emerged from Adam and Eve, and therefore that our genes carry, and they wouldn't have used the word genes, but our minds carry the memories of our ancestors. And since we all come from the same two people, then we have this collection of symbols, but within our dreams, our personal unconscious, those symbols are utilized in a very unique fashion. So if you pick up a dream dictionary and you are told that when people dream of their teeth falling out, it means blah, 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 well, that's going with the idea that it's a collective unconscious trait, but you specifically in your dream with all the things that are going on, it might mean something very specific to you. Alfred Adler looked at the inferiority complex, that our job in life is to feel like we are superior, and that we often carry with us traits of inferiority that we develop throughout our childhood and our early development, and that as we get older we try to do that. But if we cannot overcome our inferiority complex, we may actually overcompensate. So kind of, the little dog next to the big dog, that barks more. That kind of idea that you might do more. All right, now on to trait theory. Trait theory says that our personality is genetic, that it comes from our DNA, and that we often share a certain number of traits. We'll look at factor analysis. With factor analysis, it is going to break your personality into components, and it's going to measure each of them separately, just like we did with intelligence testing. You have the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2, or the MMPI-2. This test is going to be diagnostic. It will tell you if you are low in one of 10 categories that would make you clinical. After therapy, often people show a shift in their scores, and it shows that the therapy either did or did not work. It is a standardized test, meaning that it can be given to anybody, and it can be graded or scored by like a Scantron machine. So it's been normed across the population, and it is standardized. The Big Five theory of personality, remember ocean or canoe. You have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You have an idea of what each one of those means. Then we have Gordon Allport with central traits and secondary traits. So when we look at our central traits are the ones that you would define as yourself. Secondary traits, how you react in a situation. Cardinal traits, when we look at a cardinal trait, this is going to be something that very few of us had. A cardinal trait is going to be something that is defining. It's like a master status. So Hitler would have a defining cardinal trait of being evil. Mother Teresa would have a defining cardinal trait of being, empathetic or giving. Remember Raymond Cattell and his 16 personality factor theory. And again, the only thing that you need to remember about him really is that he had 16 personality factors. You don't need to know them, you don't need to, but just this idea that when we're looking at trait theory, you have the big five that said there were five. Now you have Cattell who says there's 16. Not everyone necessarily agrees on how many traits there are, how they're organized. The humanist. Rogers and Maslow come up again. With Rogers, you need to know the real versus the ideal self. This is where you can have incongruence. So if there's a large amount of overlap, the real self and the ideal self seem to be the same person, the person is probably going to be balanced and happy. If there is very little overlap between the real and the ideal, the person is probably very unhappy. That can manifest in depression or anxiety or a million other different ways. Rogers also had the person-centered therapy or the person-centered theory. And that means that at the heart of everything, you have to be empathetic, understanding, and give unconditional positive regard. Sorry for the typo. Positive regard for the individual that you're providing the therapy for. So with this one, the person has to be treated as if you were trying to understand everything from their perspective, that they're no more good or bad than you, that you are listening, that you are willing to kind of let them hear what you hear from them. Maslow, you should again remember with his hierarchy of needs, self-actualization. Eisnick had the stable and unstable with introverted and extroverted personality traits. And just remember, stable, they're going to be usually always there. Unstable, they can be situationally based. Introverted, they're internal, and then extroverted, they're external. And they're not talking about introversion and extroversion the way that Jung would have. So a stable trait might be organized, and being organized might be stable, and it might be something that is not impacted by external forces, so it's stable and introverted. You also have to look at the idea of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is going to be this idea that if prevented from being allowed to change your situation or escape something bad, if someone does that and every single time they try to escape, they are barred from it, they learn that they cannot do anything to change their situation, and therefore they may just give up and accept their situation as it is. Julian Rotter's expectancy theory is locus of control. So if you have an internal locus of control, you believe that you make choices and that you impact anything that happens to you. Someone with an external locus of control believes that outside forces, the world around them, all of those things are going to be what causes the good and the bad in their life. So the best example is you fail a test and you blame your teacher. That's an external locus of control. An internal locus of control, the person would sit there and say that they didn't do well in the test because they didn't study hard enough. So either of those could be motivating reasons for how someone views what happens to them. Bandura is going to look at reciprocal determinism, and remember Bandura had social learning theory. So he's going to believe that the way you think, your environment, and your personality all shape the things that you go ahead and do. So your environment, your world, the way that you think about things, it's all kind of, it's a give and take. You modify, you engage, and you shape it to kind of fit you. And then the last term I want you guys to remember is self-efficacy. And I always like to remember it as self-efficient. You are more likely to engage in activities that you feel that you're efficient at, that you're good at, that you are capable in, more so than things that you don't. So people with a high level of self-efficacy believe that they can do certain things. People with low levels of self-efficacy believe that they cannot. It's just this internal belief of, and generally people with high self-esteem have high self-efficacy, but you can still have low self-efficacy in just certain specific smaller areas. So it's not a universal, it's not about the entire scope of your life, but generally if you are pretty good with self-esteem, you also have a fairly decent sense of self-efficacy.